Good evening, all, and welcome. Tonight, I have the pleasure of being joined by the sensational Sinister Grave. Also, as a forewarning, Story 7 contains references to child abuse. I've left an X next to the timestamps in the description if you'd rather skip this one. But without further ado, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control.
This is a story that has actually happened to me while snorkeling in the Caribbean. Yes, I, Sinister Grave, had a hazardous and scary encounter in paradise. So, I was in my early teenage years and I was on a series of trips around the Caribbean with a wilderness group. If anyone has ever been in a wilderness group, with awesome people, the experiences you make on those trips can be wonderful and life-changing, for the most part. So, to begin the story, I was in the Dry Tortugas, a set of islands founded off Key West, Florida in the 1500s by Ponce de Leon, which later became occupied by the Americans, and in the 1800s on Garden Key, Fort Jefferson was built. Now, Fort Jefferson dominates the island as it is a massive brick fortress with cannons positioned all over it. It is truly a sight to behold. I highly suggest visiting there. It's a beautiful island, or should I say Fortress Island. Now, we went there to learn about the history of the fort, but mostly to experience the aquatic life surrounding the island. On the first day we arrived, we just went kayaking and fishing. At the time, as long as you have a fishing license, you could fish, but there were certain fish that you couldn't catch, like the Goliath grouper, which was truly a menacing beast of a fish. Now, on the second day, that was when I went snorkeling around the island. I got my snorkel gear and my bathing suit and I plunged into the water. Oh man, what a beautiful sight. I mean, the clarity of the water was insanely clear. Great visibility. I could see fish until they were mere shimmering specks in the water. It was truly fantastic. But to speed things up, I was swimming by the docks because there are no people fishing or boats nearby. So I was around 6 or 8 feet underwater and I was spectating a couple red snappers and grunts between the dock pylons when I saw a dark figure underneath the shadow of the dock. And it was really dark due to the coral buildup in the barnacles. I don't know what I was thinking, but I wanted to take a closer look. I slowly swam towards the dark shadow of the dock. I had a good breath of air in, so I was good for about 30 seconds to see whatever that thing was. I slowly moved my hands to get closer and closer. I finally began to see the thing that was in front of me, and I immediately stopped. I saw 2 big brown pearlescent eyes facing right at me. The creature started to move slowly towards me. Sooner and sooner, I am able to gauge the size of this thing. And I think to myself, oh my God. As this creature came out of the shadows and into the light, that's when I saw it face to face. A 600-pound Goliath grouper. I was absolutely petrified. I kid you not, this thing freaked me out more than anything I've ever imagined. And it was the largest creature that I was ever 3 feet away from. At this point, the behemoth positioned itself to the side. His eye was fixed on me, waiting to see what my move was. And right now, I've been probably 35 seconds underwater and I'm starting to feel the fatigue set in. I know if I move too fast, the grouper may strike. I've heard stories of groupers swallowing snorkelers and divers' arms before. I did not want that to happen to me at all. So, while containing myself and yearning, and I mean yearning to get oxygen, I told myself, fuck it. I folded my arms. I slowly positioned my legs in front of me and gently kicked in front of me. I started to back up very slowly, no sudden moves. The fish can be a real wild card. The eye of the grouper was still fixed on me. At this point, I was 40 to 50 seconds underwater. I was really straining and I needed a breath of air. I decided to take a kick that would send me out of the dock. The beast observed me, and it remained in that position, merely 10 feet away from me now. To my luck, from then on, the grouper stayed under the dock. Now, it was finally time for me to get to the surface. I was so relieved that the grouper didn't go after me, and even more relieved that I could get air. I began my ascension to the surface. I began to rise from around 6 to 8 feet, and I had my hands up in front of me to help me rise to the surface, only to feel a sharp and painful sensation on my left index finger. I raised my head slowly to see what just got me, and once again, I thought in my head, "Fuck. No. Oh my God, what the fuck?" The surface was covered, and I mean covered, with hundreds and hundreds of Portuguese man-of-war jellyfish. I'm not exaggerating at all. This was my worst nightmare that I didn't even realize. The winds of the sea blew them in. Hundreds and hundreds of them. Blue and purple jellyfish floating on the surface of the water. Their dark purple tentacles clustered below the sail, which is a sac of air to keep them buoyant. But the part of them that almost always stings people are the long, nearly transparent tentacles that drag down below them. And those tentacles can reach numerous feet underwater, making it dangerous for people to swim below them. Now, at this point, I exhaled my breath that I was holding in because of the fatigue. I was completely shocked beyond what I felt when I saw the grouper face to face. In a radius of 20 feet, there was a colony of man-o-war. There was no way I could swim around it. I thought to myself, well, I guess I have no other option. No matter what happens, this will be very painful. I looked for the biggest opening I could that was closest to the shore. I was near the beach and the dock, but I did not want to go to the dock because of the grouper. But alas, I saw my chance, and I took it. I skimmed the bottom of the sand that was rising. I was getting closer to the beach when I felt a sting on my back. Fuck, that hurt. Oh man, I kept pressing on. I was so close to the beach, and now I had to immediately get air. I tried to move the long tentacles aside underwater with the waves from my hands. To my luck, it worked. But there was one man-of-war that wouldn't move. It was either my head that was going to get stung, or my hands. And I think we all know what choice I made. I accepted this. I already had 2 stings that I realized wasn't powerful enough to kill me. So, as I reached the surface, with my right hand out of the water, I picked up the sail of the man-of-war, and with my left, I used my left arm and the back of my hand to guide the 2 long tentacles away from my head. And finally, I emerged from the water, gasping for air. Salt water entered my mouth and I coughed, but I still had air. The sensation of breathing again was so appreciated. But it was followed by sheer horror as I looked down and saw the Man-O-War's tentacle wrapped around my arm. Believe it or not, I didn't yell or scream. I couldn't. It was way too much to process. I waddled out of the water with my flippers still on, holding the Man-O-War just to make sure that when I released it, none of the tentacles would fly back and sting me. Finally, I got it off and let it go. Though, I could not tell you how excruciating the pain was from that. Unlike anything, and I mean anything that I have felt before, worse than boiling water splashing onto my wrist, which is a complete understatement. This was my worst nightmare, and I was living it. My arm felt like it had been lacerated and stung by 1,000 bees, not to mention my hand, finger, and my back. However, my right hand, which held the sail, was surprisingly unscathed. Again, I looked down at my arm and hand, and it had looked like I had had red stringy vein-like marks protruding from the skin. It had almost looked like a mural of tattooed scribbly lines that had been made by a 3-year-old. I immediately ran to our tents, which was above the beach, but only my team leader was there for my group. And when she saw me running, based off of her facial expression, she saw the marks of the Man-O-War. To my luck, we had a small bottle of vinegar for this exact scenario, as it neutralizes the stings of jellyfish. She poured it on my wounds while asking me how this happened. I told her the story. She immediately scolded me for going out there alone without a swimming buddy. But due to the amount of wounds all over my body, there wasn't enough vinegar. She poured the vinegar on my back, which had more sting marks than I thought, and even on my shoulders, which I didn't even notice due to shock. There was only 1/3 of the bottle left, and I still had to use it for my arm and my hand, including my finger. So, I dipped my finger into the small bottle and turned it upside down. The vinegar had worked for the wounds. They were substantially less painful, but still hurt. And I positioned my arm in a way that the vinegar could run down it. As the last of the vinegar flowed from the bottle, the upper part of my arm was treated, but the vinegar flowed to the under part of my wrist and showered the ground beneath me. I looked at my team leader in agonizing dismay. She cursed under her breath, which she almost never does. Then she looked at me and said, "Well, do you have to pee?" I told her in response, "Really? That's what you're gonna ask me at this very painful moment?" She laughed for a bit and then replied, "Well, since we're out of vinegar..." I thought to myself, you got to be kidding me. But I looked at her face, and at this point she was dead serious. I mean, what other options do I really have? She insisted further that I do it. I mean, she put vinegar on me and then took my wounds seriously. If she means it, I guess I would have to trust her. Well, to save you all the details, my hand survived, though it was definitely not as effective as vinegar. I was surprised that it didn't get infected. I had scars from the Man-O-Wars for a while. I mean, months, but eventually they went away. Well, looking back, I not only learned multiple valuable lessons due to curiosity and ignorance, I learned the hard way. However, this story has to make it on my top 5 list of worst nightmares that have come to reality for me. Oh, and before I finish this story, later on that night we went fishing, but I didn't actually fish because I was injured, obviously. But one of my teammates caught this 600-pound grouper that was under the dock. And it was a 4-hour-long fight with the beast, but we managed to beach it in the shallow waters of the shore and release it back. Although, when I was once again face to face with the Leviathan out of the water, it would not take its eyes off of me.
When I was around 4 years old, I would often visit my grandmother, who lived next door, and to listen to her tell stories and play with her dog, a golden retriever. His name was Pup. Pup was a good dog, so playful and sweet, big enough to chase off any intruders, but gentle enough to leave alone a small child such as myself at the time. Everyone in the family loved Pup. It was sometime in the fall that this happened. We lived just off the road, yet somehow still in the middle of nowhere. At times, random people would approach our houses at odd hours in need of help. Other times, strangers would come by to act strange, for lack of better words. I remember being at Grandma's house next to the door, playing with Pup outside on the porch, when I saw a man in a red hooded sweatshirt standing at the top of the driveway. He was watching me play with Pup. He was pretty far away, but I could tell he was watching us. I may have only been 4, but I knew strangers staring at me was not a good thing. He had the hood up, entrenching his face in shadow. Aside from being unable to see his face clearly, he looked normal, but he just stared at me and Pup, playing. I went inside to tell my grandma, but when I brought her out to see him, he was gone. "Maybe you just imagined it, honey," my grandma told me. And maybe I did. Pup and I spent the rest of the day inside with Grandma. I felt uneasy about the man who stared at us. She called my mum next door and told her I wasn't myself after supposedly seeing a man in a red sweatshirt. Nobody but me saw him. And who goes by the word of a 4-year-old? Mum came to pick me up after getting that call. I kissed Grandma goodbye as well as Pup. Time passed, and later that night I saw through my window she had let Pup outside to use the bathroom, chained up so he wouldn't run off. Grandma fell asleep apparently, because he stayed out there all night. The next morning there was a commotion in my grandma's yard. My family and I went over to see what was going on. Grandma was crying, and lying in the yard was Pup. He had been brutally attacked, multiple stab wounds all over his body, which had been left by the decorative well in the yard. Pup was covered in his own blood, and I burst into tears. We all did. My dad offered to clean up and bury Pup, but one thing stood out to me. In his teeth were a small strand of red fabric, and on the well, even more red fabric, as if Pup had bit someone wearing red and made them skid against the well. Immediately, I was reminded of the strange man in a red hoodie who watched us from afar that day. I tried saying it was the stranger, but nobody listened. I'm 21 years old now. I know whoever that man was killed Pup. I don't know his identity, and to this day, whenever I see someone wearing a plain red hooded sweatshirt, I get a little antsy. This has stuck with me my entire life. I miss Pup, and I hate the color red.
This is kind of a tough one for me. Normally stuff like this does not happen. I mean, this is completely batshit, and I kind of just want to share this because, I mean, what happened to me does not happen to normal people. I mean, this shit's some fairy tale shit, but I figured someone has to listen to this. So this happened to me about last summer. Little background about me. I'm a 6'4" guy, 235 pounds, more on the buff side. I was with my fiance in Utah, near a big desert where a lot of missing people have been reported. So, we knew not to get near and, stay alert if we do. But we packed out near a nice lake with a lot of trees around it, and it looked beautiful. So we went towards it and camped out there. And we sat by this fire that we made and talked about marriage and shit, typical, I want this stuff to happen and all of that good stuff. But after a good 4 hours of, just sitting there, talking, drinking, we went off to bed because it was nearly like 2 a.m. So in the middle of the night, I needed to take a quick piss, so I went off to the tree line and about 20 feet away from the tent. So, I finished up, I heard crackling sound behind me, and I, thought it was my wife. But, I didn't have a flashlight with me, so I couldn't check out what it was, but before I moved to the camp area, I did some research on it, and it said that in the past some fucked up ritual was done to, summon this beast. They called it a skinwalker, I think. And men say that when you talk about it, they focus on you. I've read that they like to mess with you in your head, like pretending to have a voice or of like a relative or a friend of yours, maybe someone who have died or someone that you missed. They look fucked up. They look skinny, kind of look like a dog or a jackal or coyote type animal. But anyway, so I stood there, and 20 feet from the camp, and I hear crackling sounds. I thought it was my wife, and they're getting closer and louder. And finally stopped. I looked in the distance, and holy shit, it was not my wife. About 40 feet away, it stood on its 4 legs, and it had red eyes looking right at me. I freeze, and the dread came flowing through my body. I felt my veins just constrict. I could not move. I slowly walked back in what felt like paralysis, eyes still watching me. I hurried to the tent, and it started smelling like something was, rotting, like eggs or something like that. And right before I opened the tent, the skinwalker started to scream. Its scream was so eerie and piercing that I panicked on spot. I told my fiance to pack up, and we needed to run away quick. So we did. We managed to. Right before we entered the car, though, I took a final look into the forest, and there it stood again, just grinning at me. We sped off and never came back to that forest. So, that was my story, basically. I'm telling you, those things are the most scariest and creepy things that I've ever seen in my life. So, be careful.
I am a 23-year-old girl from a big city in the Netherlands, Europe. But last year, I moved to a small town in Belgium to pursue my master's degree. The move was pretty rough for me. I went from living in a metropolitan, busy and lively city to a quiet and sleepy town where everything closes after 6 p.m. Since I'm from a big city, I know how to take care of myself in some unfortunate situations, such as being harassed by creepy people on the streets and having to bike home late at night. This is why I never felt any sense of unsafety in this new town that I moved to. My logic was, since there is almost no one here, nothing will happen to me. I survived my hometown easily, so why would this small town be any different? Well, a few weeks ago, I would find out how wrong I actually was. Everything in this Belgian town is about a 5-minute bike ride away from each other. This included my boyfriend's place. One night, at around 1:30 a.m, he asked me if I wanted to stay over. But since he had drunk some beers, he wouldn't be able to take his car to pick me up. I replied that I didn't mind and would just walk over there. Any other night, I would have just taken my bike, but I had just lent it to my roommate, so that wasn't an option. So I packed my stuff and left for the 15-minute walk. As I was leaving my street, I noticed how incredibly quiet it was in this town. I felt a bit uncomfortable, but I shrugged it off as not being used to the silence. To calm my nerves, I decided to listen to a podcast on my headphones while I continued my walk. I sped up a bit, and as I was about 3 minutes away from my boyfriend's house, I was crossing a large square in the town centre. Suddenly, in the back of my mind, I thought I detected a soft whistling. I slowed down my pace and concentrated. There it was again. Was it just a sound in the podcast? I took off my headphones and heard the whistling again, but louder this time. It was a slow, sad melody, which I didn't recognize, but it made me feel very uneasy. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I wanted to book it out of there. After taking a few more steps, I discovered where the whistling was coming from. From the dark, I saw a male figure emerging, slowly walking towards me. He was whistling his sad tunes as he casually looked around. This was super odd, as this was a sleepy-ass town where there was nothing to be seen, especially not at 1:30 a.m, when there wasn't any shops or bars opened at the time. There weren't even that many streetlights, so a casual walk around town wouldn't make any sense. His loud whistling carried around the square and made me crave the precious, ominous silence. This man didn't acknowledge my presence, even though we were probably the only humans on the street in the town at the time. This fact creeped me out even more. No nod, no smile, not even a straight look. He kept whistling his creepy tune and making his way towards me at a faster pace. This is when the creepiest part happened. He encountered a set of bikes that were free to use for anyone in the town. These bikes were never locked, so people could get on them easily, and he was checking a bike out to see if he could take it. I, however, had seen enough. If this man would get on a bike, he would get to me in about 20 seconds. I frantically called my boyfriend, but of course, he was drinking and not minding his phone. I swept one last look at the man, only to see him get on a bike and look at me dead in the face. He conjured up the most horrifying, toothy grin upon his face as he started pedaling towards me. I screamed and started running as I got to my boyfriend's house in about a minute. I frantically knocked on the door and yelled at him to open it, while I was looking behind me if the man got closer. Fortunately, I didn't see him. They let me in, and I closed the door. I was freaked out of my mind as I started telling them what just happened. My boyfriend wanted to go out and hunt him down at once, but I begged him not to. The grin on this man's face told me this wasn't a regular creep, and I didn't want my boyfriend to get hurt. I do not know what would have happened to me if my boyfriend's place wasn't that close.
This is a crazy, and I mean truly crazy, experience that my friend endured while he worked as a bouncer in Seattle. The show at the venue that night was a rap and EDM show, and the crowd's average age was 18 through 25. We were briefed that in these type of shows there tends to be rampant drug use and spasmodic behavior of the patrons. Our orders were simple enough. If we caught them using drugs, or if they seemed as though they were a hazard to other people, they get the boot. So, the show began and we already kicked out around 6 people doing various drugs in the bathroom. Most of them were compliant and went out without any issues. And near the halfway mark of the show, I was at the bar looking for people who would pass drinks to minors. I spotted a man dressed up in all black with a weird face mask with beads arranged like a skull on it, and he was talking to a young woman who was dressed with nothing but a sports bra and multicolored ripped yoga leggings. Both of them had drinking wristbands on, so they were fine in terms of legally drinking. And with that situation being clear, I looked around to see if there was anything else that stuck out. However, upon glancing back, the young woman turned towards the crowd and bursted out in dancing, while the man received the drinks. And when the man received the drinks, I could have sworn I saw him open up a capsule and pour a white powdery substance into one of the drinks. Instantly, my instincts kicked in, and I moved towards the man. The music was obnoxiously loud and the lights were cutting in and out with the beat, making it hard for me to focus in, as it was visually almost too much for me. I know where they are, but I'm trying to get to them as fast as possible before she receives the drink. Through the lights cutting in and out in the density of the crowd, I managed to see him give her the drink. I'm within 10 feet of them and she raises up her glass to take a sip. And at this point, I had to tell myself, fuck it, and barrel through the group of people that was separating us. Drinks spill everywhere, people start screaming at me and pushing me and cursing. I managed to turn my flashlight on strobe mode and point it at her. To my luck, she stopped herself from taking the sip. With the music raging on, I managed to get through to her by yelling in her ear, telling her that the man spiked her drink, the one who gave it to her. She immediately threw the drink on the ground and proceeded to scream at the man, calling him a complete fucker. She leapt towards the man who brought her the drink before he could say anything and before I could proceed with the next course of action. To my surprise, the man instantly swung at the woman. However, I managed to shoulder check him and absorb the blow. With one hand, I managed to keep the woman at bay, and with the other, I grabbed the man by the collar. The woman was ready to shred this man to pieces, and as much as I would love for her to go at it, we had a rule of no fights. So, at this point, the man felt cornered and angry. He managed to shove me off of him and make a run for it. I fell to the ground and tried to get up as fast as I could, but by the time that I recovered and chased him to the main lobby, he was already gone. Damn it. He's out there in the streets now. Nothing I can do besides let my crew know. I didn't even have enough information on him, and I didn't see his full face, nor did the woman know his name. I told my teammates to be on the lookout for him around the building. However, for the rest of the night, he wasn't by our venue. By the end of the show, we probably had 10 more ejections, but nothing like what happened before. When we closed down the building and clocked out, I decided to go to the bar with my coworkers and have a few drinks. I told them about what happened and the rest of the story, and they shared their stories of incidences like that, when the creep got away. For a few hours, we kept ordering rounds of drinks and retelling stories, but it was getting late and I had to go home. The walk back to my car was a bit far, which was good because I didn't want to drive under the influence. And I always park in this parking lot because it's secluded and it doesn't require me to pay. Eventually, I reached my car and I was trying to sober up, so I lit a cigarette. And as I got my cigarette lit, I heard a faint sound of footsteps. My ears perked up. I was rather alarmed because this parking lot is very secluded and I owned the only car that was currently in the parking lot. The distant footsteps got closer and closer. I felt more anxious as I heard them. I continued to smoke my cigarette and tried to gauge my surroundings. I've been in this situation before where I got mugged and my car stolen. The bushes in the parking lot were tall and big enough for cover, so I couldn't see past them. In this situation before, I freaked out and I tried to get into my car, and as I put the keys into the ignition, I looked up only to be staring down the barrel of a gun. However, this time, I was not going to make the same mistake. I knew whoever this was, they were close enough to pull the same shit. So, I tried to keep my cool and waited out on the hood of my car, hoping that this would pass. As the cigarette was nearly burned out, I tossed it and I went for another one. As I opened my pack, I accidentally dropped it. I reached down to pick it up, and when I looked back up, I saw a dark, shadowy figure between the parking lot light and the bushes about 15 feet away from me. The figure just stood there and cocked his head to the side with his hands behind his back. My heart was beating fast. I've been in this shitty situation before, but I know what the odds are. And I couldn't believe that it was happening again. I got up from the hood of my car and I decided to stand tall. I lit another cigarette and I waited for his move. If he had a gun, it's over. But if he had a knife or something like that, then the odds are better for me. As I stood up, the darkly cloaked person moved towards me slowly from the light. His head was down and he had a hood on, so I couldn't really see his face. But by the time he was 9 feet away from me, he looked up. And that's when I saw the man with the skull mask. He still had his mask on, and I could hear him breathing short and shallow breaths. My heart was flying off the wall at this point, but noticing his breath gave me a clue to his state of mind. Not only was he breathing short and shallow, his knees were shaking. He was angry, but I could also see that he was very scared. Now, in my experience, someone who is scared would give me an advantage. But being angry and scared means that he was about to do something stupid. As I stand here, I have a shit feeling that he's about to do something to me. I notice his left shoulder dipping as if he was grabbing something from behind him in his back pocket or something. I know for a fact that it was a weapon. As he reaches for whatever is behind his back, my anxiety is going through the roof. I look dead at his face and I don't blink. I'm expecting the worst to happen. I accept the situation that I am in and I brace myself. When the man's arm emerges from behind him, I witness a long black steel fixed blade unfold. It wasn't a gun, but this knife had a serrated edge on one side and it looked as though it was made to scramble insides. I was relieved it wasn't a gun, but it was still a lethal weapon. And as I was thinking about this, he took a step closer. Fuck. This is it. It's about to go down. And I don't know what came over me, but I did something that I look back on as one of the stupidest things I've ever done. I took a drag from my cigarette. I inhaled. And then I proceeded to say to him, "It's you. I knew you were a piece of shit when I saw you spiking that girl's drink. You ran like a coward and waited for me for 4 hours just so you can confront me with a fucking knife. Fuck you!" When I said fuck you, I bucked at him with my hands drawn in defensive mode and with my cigarette lit in my mouth brightly from the deep breaths that I was taking. And I took a step forward. At this time, I was not thinking straight. My adrenaline was kicking in and my heart rate was out of control. The man wielded his knife up and proceeded to tell me, "You fucked with me. Now, I'm gonna fucking kill you right here in this parking lot with no witnesses and no one to rescue you." And at that very moment, he stepped in to lunge at me. I quickly flicked my cigarette at his face, which was covered by the mask. To my luck, the embers managed to stick on his eyepiece, which was covered by a thin black fabric. He covered his eye with his right hand and lunged with his left, the one with the blade in it. I moved to the side and I managed to grab the hilt of the blade with my left hand, and I elbowed him in the face with the other. As my elbow met his face, the hand that was holding the knife lost the grip, and the serrated knife sliced open my hand. The man recovered and then lunged at me again, and I felt a sharp needle-like pain in the upper part of my chest. That was it. Not only was my left hand cut open, but I got stabbed in the upper part of my fucking chest. We both paused as we were both shocked at what happened, and in that moment, I kneed him in the stomach, ripped his mask off, and punched him repeatedly in the face, over and over and over again. He was out, and I began to feel really weak as my adrenaline was wearing off. I managed to call 911 and give the location and a brief report of the incident to the dispatcher. I kept the blade in my chest so that I wouldn't cause more bleeding, especially because of the serrated edges. I tried to keep myself awake as long as possible. I could feel myself slipping. Luckily, I had zip ties in my cargo pants pocket that I used to bind fences together at work to create a barrier for the artist by this stage. So I managed to zip tie my wrist to minimize the bleeding from my cut hand. And after 6 minutes of agonizing pain and waiting, the police and ambulance showed up. While I was in the ambulance, I saw the man regain consciousness in cuffs and try to fight off the cops. But there was no running away from justice this time. But in the grand scheme of things, I was okay. I had a ton of stitches in my hand and chest, although I have limited mobility with closing my left hand. But to sum this up, I guess, what I've learned from this experience is that there are truly sinister people out there. But most importantly, I should probably park closer to work from now on, even if I have to pay. Well, I just want you guys to know I'm Dene Navajo, and boy, have I heard a lot of stories growing up on the reservation. Well, I've never actually seen anything myself, which I'm thankful for. I have been benefited by the people who have. And they say that there's a different kind of evil that exists in the high, quiet deserts and deep sandstone canyons of Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, even Colorado in the southern Ute area. I can only describe it as an ancient evil. Now, there are helpful ceremonies and rituals and traditions that are still practiced to this day. Hell, I mean, even the local hospital has an on-duty medicine man. But, I don't know, it seems like a double-edged sword. What I mean is that there's also black magic, which most Dene don't even acknowledge or speak of. We are very superstitious and are heavy with taboos. You will find this with most First Nation people. From Alaska to Argentina, it's just something that you don't do, in fear that it will get the attention of unwanted spirits or harmful beings. Skinwalkers or Naldushi are just a few stories that kept me up at night with the covers over my head. There's a quick one that I want to share with you guys, just a quick story if you would bear with me. A Navajo tribal police officer was driving west on what used to be officially named Highway 666. It was lightly snowing, maybe, a quarter inch, which is a lot of snow for where we are from. And he sees an old woman walking on the side of the road. How she got there or where she was going was not apparent because she was so far out of the middle of nowhere. We could not track her. He didn't see her right away, but as he passed, he noticed that she's dressed in traditional clothing, a shawl, dress, moccasins, and her hair in the traditional bun. Not too odd, but many elders still choose to dress traditionally. But why was she out in such cold weather and this late at night? I was thinking hitchhiking, but maybe he passed her too quickly and now has to turn around. And as he makes his U-turn, he notices that she is nowhere to be seen. This is a fairly flat terrain, and he for sure has seen an old woman walking. He pulls the squad car over and steps out with his flashlight. Confused, he manages to find the woman's footprints in the shallow snow. He follows the footprints, and then they suddenly disappear into what looks like a dog footprint, heading away from the road in a hurry. He immediately jumps back into the squad car and meets up with the officers near his patrol. He's a little shaken up, but he asks the other officers if he'd ever seen anything like that. And the officers tell him that he has. He also explains that sometimes it's an old woman, sometimes a very beautiful young girl, but always on that road and always in the snow, waiting for the right good Samaritan to let her in their car. I still get nervous driving those wide open spaces at night. I keep my eyes strictly on the road and turn my music up high. I barely pick up hitchhikers, but I never pick them up at night.
When I was around 7 years old, our family had got out to Kmart. It was always a high point for us kids. Although our family was very poor, we could always look at the great toys they had back then and pretend our carts were full of what we wanted most to bring home. It was normal for us kids. My older sister Joanna and younger sister Kim were among the latter. being 10 and the former being 3 respectively. Kim was with Mum and Joanna and I went to the toy aisle. She went to the girls' side and I to the boys' side. After a few minutes, there, I suddenly had a great pressure within my bladder, and at the same time, I felt like I had to do more than urinate. I went to the restroom and got myself in the stall. I noticed the lock on the door didn't work, so I tried to stuff paper into it to keep it shut. After beginning, I noticed the front of the bathroom door opened, and someone entered the cubicle. Before I could do anything, the store door was open, and the man who entered came in, without knocking or asking. He quickly shut the door, and did something horrific to me. I'm not going to say exactly what he did, but I've lived with it my entire life, and it was incredibly upsetting, disturbing, and unpleasant. I was shocked and scared witless. What could I do now? What was he doing here? He was talking very quietly and kept a very tight look at my eyes. He seemed to be a hypnotist, as it seemed, like the way they did in cartoons for me. I felt like I should run and flee, but his voice was so soothing and his eyes seemed to be so gentle and kind. I must have been under some kind of influence, as I didn't stutter or cry or anything. When the ordeal was finally over, he whispered to me that I was going to follow him out and was going to go with him to his car, and that I was going to live with him forever. I began to cry, but not in tears, more a whimper, as I knew I'd missed my family so much. As we left the stall, we washed hands at the sink and then made our way to the front door and began to leave. I thought I was going to pass out, until, as the door was pushed open, my dad was standing there. He wanted me to come look at fishing poles. I almost ran to my dad, but the perpetrator just walked by, blushing greatly, and my dad ignored him and asked if I washed my hands. My dad wasn't a man I could have told. He was a person who would have flown off the handle and thrown a dining table across the room in a furious anger. This is an ideal way for a father to ensure that a son or daughter would never feel safe enough to tell their parents if someone had been molesting them. It was because of this that I never said anything. I was too afraid to disrupt the household. I never told my mother why I couldn't have used the bathroom at Kmart, and it took me a long time to ever feel safe there again. I just want to add that if you've been abused, or if something's happened to you, it's always best to talk. Don't keep it inside for fear of what might happen, because you're never in the wrong.
Just a few weeks ago, we were on a road trip from British Columbia to San Diego, and we came upon a campsite just outside of Crescent City, California. We drove through one side of the campground and it was relatively empty. I noticed a few scattered tents, but nobody close to the location that we ended up picking. We had tons of space. We wanted an early night, so I started a fire while my girlfriend started cooking. We ate, we had a few beers, and climbed up to our rooftop tent with our dog around 9 p.m. or so. I had a rough time sleeping and woke up a few times, but finally fell into decent sleep. And in the pitch dark, with all of our tent windows and canvases closed, I was awoken at 1 a.m. by someone whistling outside of our tent the tune of "When the Saints Come Marching In." After a few minutes of this repetitive whistling, I nudged my girlfriend, who woke up and was obviously freaked out as well. The whistling then turned to chanting like, "When you sleep here, you disrespect me. And when you disrespect me, you disrespect the U.S. Marines." The person would then start spelling out words like F-L-E-E. The verbiage and tone kept getting more aggressive, so we decided we had to make a move. I slowly unzipped the tent while our guard dog was snoring, and I got my head out of the tent. I took a few seconds to let my eyes adjust and figure out where the person was. I felt more confident once I could somewhat see and hear, so I climbed down and my girlfriend passed me the dog. She climbed down too. We flipped the tent up without securing it and we jumped into the truck while the person was still whistling. We went to a motel in Crescent City. The next morning, we drove back to get a few of our belongings that weren't in the truck. And a family who had been camping a few sites over said it went on for another 2 or 3 hours, and that it was the scariest thing their family has ever experienced.
I am a 24-year-old female. I am tall, thin, and have sickly long strawberry blonde hair. I collect looks, a lot, but mostly for my height because I'm 6 feet tall. This happened 2 years ago when I was working night shifts in a company that's located in my country's main hospital. I was really aware of all the dangers the world had to offer, especially at night. I was a mother of 1, now 2, and happily married, so I didn't have a slightest need to look decent for my routes on public transport. This is at night, so I dressed down for my own protection. I wore the unsexiest jogging outfit, so no one would think I was one of the girls who had been partying for the whole night, and heading home on the first train in the morning at 5 a.m. In my country, bars close at 4, and I was waiting for the train with people who had had a long night partying, who had missed the 2 a.m. train. My workplace was located in a rural area, and the train station was open 24/7. I was by myself most of the nights, heading to work and back home, reading a book to maximize the barrier for drunk males to approach me. One night, I walked to the station with one of my friends from work. We were chatting and waiting for our trains to come. We were having a fun time waiting, and the time went really fast. She was heading in the opposite direction with the exact same train route that I was taking. When her train came 2 minutes before mine, I happily waved and said that I'd see her tomorrow. But mid-wave, I noticed a tall man, much taller than I, who was coming from the incoming train, had stopped and was staring at me blankly, just staring with his hands dangling to his sides, wearing a black hoodie with a hood on, just staring, as all the other passengers walked past him, because he was partially blocking the end of the escalator leading to the station. I looked in his eyes for a much longer time than I feel comfortable with, mostly because I wanted to see him stop looking at me and kept on going, but he didn't. I went down another escalator to my platform while standing sideways, so I'd see him right away if he were coming after me. As I said before, my friend took the same train as I, but in the other direction, and that is the train from which the man came from. So there would be no reason for him to take the same train as me, other than if he had fallen asleep and missed his own stop. He didn't follow me though. I went to stand on the platform, and after a minute, I saw my train coming. When I was looking at the train, I heard loud footsteps coming from the escalator. I looked its way, and I saw the man coming down the stairs so fast it was unreal, stepping 2 at a time and lunging at the train. All the rest of my security scrambled down. There were many other people on the train and the platform, but I felt so alone. I was the only one who knew he wasn't supposed to be there. He ran in front of me, between me and the train facing the doors. He pushed the button to open the doors, and calmly walked away. Me and a few other passengers went inside and didn't see the man. I felt confident that I was safe among the passengers heading to their morning shifts. I had an hour train ride, and there was no way he followed me all the way there, right? I sat down in a booth to read my book, and didn't even think about the strange encounter before my own stop. I put the book back in my bag and swung the bag over my shoulder to my grey oversized jogging outfit. I started to head to the doors and glanced up to see the same guy standing there. He was staring straight at me, not my eyes but my waist. I didn't want to touch those doors. I wanted to turn around and go to the others, but people were coming in behind me. Then I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. His eyes. He was obviously high on something strong. First, the thought of him being high calmed me. It explained why he was behaving so strangely, until I remembered all I know about people on drugs. Their strength, the speed, the emotionlessness, and the ability to feel no pain in some cases. I walked towards the door, and he had a steady glare facing at my hip, hands hanging on his sides. When I went all the way to open the doorway, he turned, faced the doors with 3 inches between his face and the glass door. I was standing there with a few others, so I felt kind of secure. The train hadn't quite come to a stop yet. We were all silently waiting behind the creepy guy's hoodie. When the train stopped, the creepy guy pushed the button to open the doors. He went to the side, leaning back against the wall to let everyone out, and stayed put. He didn't seem to be getting off, just like when he opened the doors to the train, but didn't seem to be getting in. I was concerned. I felt his stare and couldn't help but look. It was an empty, vacant, scary stare. I walked out as close as I could to others. My plan was to walk with the group anywhere they'd go. If he were even to follow me to my house, it was the opposite way. All the others were heading to the underground tunnels, where the train went. I hadn't seen him, but I couldn't be sure. I didn't face him when getting off. I was paranoid, but sure enough, I left the group and ran the opposite way. I didn't have far to go. I'm athletic and filled with adrenaline, but I couldn't imagine outrunning a man taller than me. I ran less than a mile, saw no one. I was crying and hyperventilating the whole way. He didn't follow. He would have to catch up with me, and at that point I felt calm. What was that? What did he want? To scare me? Well, he managed to. I hope he never does it to anyone else. For all I know, he was following me.
I have many stories, but one which stands out happened on the first Saturday of July 2008. Whether the day was before or after July 4th, I don't know, I forgot. I've moved into a castle owned by a widowed old lady who was a friend of mine in order to help her run it. It was open to the public for tours and events. We had a tour where the chaperone of the group of students broke away from his group and wandered down one of the gallery halls. I caught up with him and asked him to return to his group. He stopped in front of the doors connecting the gallery to the ballroom and said, "Watch this." He waved an EMF detector in front of the doors and it went off like crazy. Finally, he joined his group, but the tour ended and we started to close up the castle for the day. An hour or so later, it was just me and the owner. She was on the 3rd floor playing the pipe organ in a room with a balcony overlooking one of the ends of the ballroom. Alongside the long end of the ballroom was a musician's gallery. I was walking along there, approaching the door at the end which led to my apartment, when I heard someone call my name from nearby. I turned. and there was no one there. I went to the organ loft and asked the owner if she called me, and she said no. But she did hear something down in the bar. When I went down to check, I didn't find anything. Then I went to the doors connecting the gallery. When I opened them, there was a blast of hot, static air rushing in, even though we had closed the windows and doors. I called the owner down and she approached via the gallery, and her hair started to lift off of her head. She said that there was something here which ought to not be here. Entering the ballroom, she walked into the middle of the room, looked up at one of the large stained glass windows, closed her eyes and said, "Show me your face." She jumped back and she said she had seen something sinister. She again closed her eyes, pushed her hands forward and said, "Get out of my house." Her hands strained against something I could not see, and she pushed forward. She was leaning about 45 degrees on the tip of her toes. Suddenly, there was a loud bang from behind me and another stream of hot, staticky air. The owner fell forward onto the ground and got up and said, "It's gone." However, for the remainder of the evening, we heard laughing, whispering, knocking, tapping, footsteps and echoes throughout the castle. I contemplated leaving that night, but remained for a couple of years. I guess it was worth it because I'm still breathing and feeling fine. Or do I?
Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I just wanted to let you know that next Saturday, I'm going to be live streaming with my friend CZ's World and Lady White Rabbit over on CZ's channel for our monthly show, The Dead Stream. Be sure to punch it into your calendars so that we see you there. You'll be able to find all the information in the description. I also want to give a huge thank you to my good friend Sinister Grave for joining us in tonight's video. He is an incredibly talented narrator, so please be sure to check out his channel and give him some love. He creates some amazing content that you do not want to miss. Be sure to leave this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing for even more stories every day. But for now, click the link on screen or in the description to carry on the horrors for tonight, over with Sinister Grave. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.